Perfectly Normal Radio. It sounds a little something like this.
I wonder how many soldiers that are on the North Korean side of the DMZ just really want to jump over and fucking be like, I'm done.
Welcome to Perfectly Normal Radio, and for today, we have the teaser for our series about Korea. The topic had come up a few times, and I've had this immense wealth of pictures and recordings from my grandpa about his time over there in the 50s. So, now is the time to finally put all that to good use. For those of you who didn't know, we were at war with Korea in the 50s. If you forgot, it's probably because the only thing they ever told us about it was that it was the forgotten war. So I suppose you were just doing what you were told. Which is not a great phrase when brought up during or after a war, but we're not here to judge with such highfalutin history jokes. We're here to talk about Korea. So let's get into it, and I'll be popping back in once in a while just for context. There's so much more that I'll be getting to in the series, but here now, let's start with a look at what the hell it is that you do when you're a soldier who's done all his soldiering for the day.
Our troops were cautioned that we had on the bulletin board signs not to wander into these side streets, but you can see our troops never went here. You don't know what would happen to you, although we didn't really have any problems with the local living conditions. Our troops generally stayed on the post even after hours. We had our company day room with the pool hall. We would have movies probably 3 times a week. Actually, first run movies. We saw High Noon with Gary Cooper. This would be in the fall of 1951. I don't think it was released in the United States till 1952, so we did pretty well from that standpoint. The Army took care of us, and we had our own little post exchange there with candies and goodies, and you could get beer. Yes, they did serve beer. The British are a little different. They like their gin. Not so with the U.S. Army. At least it wasn't served.
So Richard, my grandpa, and our narrator, protagonist, spent time as part of the oversight for a POW camp. By the way, try referring to your grandpa by his first name. It's weird. Or you're weird. Anywho, while your Uncle Sam and my grandpa ran this camp, it was the South Korean anti-communists that did the actual guarding. For more context, the Korean War was indirectly between the USA and the USSR, or if you like, capitalism versus communism, because it's always that easy and the issue is closed and we're moving on.
This is a communist camp, and these prisoners of war were mostly from North Korea. Might have been a few South Koreans in there, but to my knowledge, we never caught any fraternization between the guards and the prisoners. In fact, there was a good deal of animosity, and at night, if any of the prisoners came out of their huts after 8 o'clock at night when the whistle blew, they were to stay in their huts. If they came out of the huts, they got shot at. So there wasn't any goodwill between the North and the South Koreans.
Occasionally, a soldier would get a pass to go sightseeing or talk about female empowerment or whatever white dudes in the 50s talked about. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where the only place to go is into town, you know full well that you end up with a list of work to do on your time off. But we get fun stories and insight out of it, so yeehaw posterity.
Several of the shops here would sell hardware, housewares. When I was stationed in the prison camp on the island of Kojido, I had a 3-day pass to come back to Busan, the island of Kojido being about 30 miles out in the China Sea. When word got around that I was going on a pass, I had telephone calls from these various prison enclosures, officers there wanting me to pick up various things, hammers, packets of nails, even olive drab paint, things like that. Not very glamorous, but they were in short supply where we were, and I just happened to know a South Korean Army lieutenant who was stationed with us in Kojido. He was coming back to Busan his home city the weekend I was there. So he took me down to a street very much like this, which must have been all stolen Army goods. But I loaded up with paint and tools and things that other people wanted, and he arranged to have it brought down to the port when our daily ship left to take me back to Busan. So to a certain extent, yes, they got the patronage from the U.S. Army, but it was kind of an underground economy like I was participating in.
So, Richard spent some time also as a watch commander, which, as you can imagine, has a lot to do with watching, commanding, and various forms of taking action. Well, here's a fun story about a time when he was absolutely not to take action, not to get involved.
A Navy ship had come in and it was docked out in the harbor when I came on duty one evening there at 4 o'clock. And the major called me in and he said, "See that ship out there?" I said, "That's a rather peculiar looking ship." He said, "Yes, that's a communications ship. That's why they have all the masts on it." Now, their troops, as we speak, have been given shore leave to go into Busan city proper, and they are to be back at midnight, and there will be a bunch of little launches from that ship tied up along the wharf here, the passenger wharf, and you just let the Navy take care of it. Don't you get involved. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I said, "Yes, sir, that's right." So, okay, everything goes along fine, and it's about 11:15, 11:30, and I noticed all of these, there were probably half dozen of these smaller launch type boats had docked up along this passenger pier, and there were several sailors out, most of them with armbands saying SP for shore patrol. So I didn't think anything about it. Well, then all of a sudden there is this noise coming, and it sounded almost like the rumble of a freight train. And what do you know? Here come all of these sailors. I'll swear most of them were drunk. It was something out of a Fred Astaire, Frank Sinatra movie. They're dragging these guys, they're carrying them, and the shore patrol guys are pushing them along to get them in these launches back to the ship. And the desk sergeant was standing there with me, and we're watching this. We were probably the equivalent of a football field away from all of this activity. So the sergeant says very dutifully, "Lieutenant, shouldn't we get some of our guys to go in there and help the shore patrol?" And I said, "No, Sergeant, we let the Navy take care of their own." So within 15 minutes, everything was quiet. Oh, they did have one boat come back, and there were a few stragglers, and that was the end of the Navy as far as I was concerned. Good riddance.
If I've learned anything about prisoners, it's that you need to teach them valuable skills. And also that they're prisoners and will always engage in the most obvious prisoner activity.
The CIE educational program was a training program that was instituted early in the life of the Kojido camp. CIE stands for Civilian Information and Education Program. The idea initially was well intended by the UN to teach the prisoners skills. So when they went back into civilian life, when the war was over, and of course, technically it's still going on. The fighting ceased in August of 1953. It turned out, but early on it was discovered that the prisoners who volunteered to learn metalworking, what they were making was knives and spears for a hopeful mass escape. So that was put to an end, and this signboard is really a remnant of that program, which didn't exist at the time.
And to elaborate on that last point, at some time in their prison career, everyone has to leave the prison. Yeah, you can die, but there's also two specific other ways.
I want to add an interesting and dramatic footnote to this. About 3 weeks after I had left the camp here at Kwanju, Sang Mudai, I spent some time again at the military police security company at the port of Busan, and I was awakened abruptly one morning. I'd been on all night duty as the duty officer, and I was awakened abruptly by one of my fellow officers who told me that the South Korean anti-communists had had a mass escape from this camp at Kwanju, and I subsequently, a day or two later, got to talk to one of the officers who had been there. And the story is that Syngman Rhee, who was the civilian president of South Korea, was fed up with the slow events at the peace conferences that were beginning at the 38th parallel, which we now know as the Panmunjom peace talks, that he issued an order to the South Korean army, which was at the Kwanju anti-communist camp. They were also responsible for guard duty, as were the South Korean soldiers on Kojido. Except here they were very friendly with the prisoners because the prisoners were anti-communist, and at an agreed time one night, the guards just opened the gates and the prisoners ran out. And that was the end of that. That bit of action I missed, but that's all right. It was better for me to hear about it than participate, I guess.
And lastly, because we love a good happy ending, here's a bit of a spoiler for our Korea story.
Arriving in Seattle, just beyond the warehouses on the piers, you can see the skyline, and to the right is the Customs Tower. Seattle is known to be foggy, usually in the morning until noontime, when hopefully 4 days out of the week the sun will come out. But for Lieutenant Valmer, the sun was out the morning he departed from Seattle for the Far East, and the sun was out the morning he arrived back in Seattle from the Far East.
And because I can't leave a good happy ending alone without exploring the complications, here's a little ditty about the border between North and South Korea in modern times, with a modern take on the old art of shooting people from far away. Thanks for listening, and we'll be rolling out whatever we're rolling out sometime in the next 2 weeks as we continue to figure out what we're actually supposed to be doing and how you would go about turning this into a thing that anyone could give a shit about. So, I'll see you then.
Yeah, the last thing that I can think of that had anything to do with that kind of shit, there was a TED Talk on why we should ban killer robots. Which is funnier sounding than the subject matter actually is, but essentially we should have international laws about robots being able to decide to kill people.
Oh yeah, because this comes up in the wake of all the drone planes and stuff like that.
Exactly. And what I didn't know, you started talking about like on the Korean border stuff, there are like these insanely good automated sniper robot things.
Oh good.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh good.
Yeah, and currently somebody needs to hit like OK on a fucking dialogue box or something to have it murder someone. But, you know, it's obviously just one step away.
Yeah, just going into the settings.
Right. Yeah. Can you go on auto? I gotta go to the bathroom.
It's got like, should you kill this? Should I kill this person? Yes, no, and then the checkbox for don't ask me this question ever again.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So anyway.
Or it'll start. It'll start using the information from what that guy looks at on the internet to decide who he'd want to kill.
Yeah.
And just makes the decisions for him. Perhaps you took me a little too seriously there, robot.
Robots.
That's funny. Funny in that modern way.
Yeah.
Because they can either mean funny as in humorous, funny as in weird, or funny as in insanely horrific.
Yeah.
To the point where you have to either giggle it out, or, I don't know.
Giggle it out.
Giggle it out. Come on, man. Just giggle it out.
Yeah.
Wu-Tang for life, kid. Wu-Tang for life. Oh, also, lastly, again, the guy we were talking about doing the TED Talk is Daniel Suarez. And besides being a smart guy who will tell you factual stuff, he also writes awesome tech thrillers, which doesn't sound nearly as cool as his books are. Just look up Demon, Change Agent, Influx, Kill Decision. He's also got a new one coming out sometime soon about asteroid mining, which will be exciting for you once you've seen what he did with drones and gene editing and whatever the hell you'd call Demon, without it taking like 5 minutes. He does good work in all capacities, so you can just go to him for good stories, and if you want to know how systemic centralization and lack of redundancy will be our downfall, just look him up on YouTube. If Audible was paying us money, I'd say something about that, but they're not, so I'm not, but maybe someday. But about next time, hold tight, stay black, and we'll see you soon. And this has been Perfectly Normal Radio. You can find this program, among other fun things, at PersonorPersons.com. Once again, that's PersonorPersons.com. Or look for Perfectly Normal Radio wherever you look for podcasts. The old thanks again and more are in the show annotations, so be sure and drink your Ovaltine over at PersonorPersons.com for stuff you might want to know about stuff we might want to tell you. Like, thanks for listening.
David was deep inside the Chinese border.
That's it. So the game is at 2 tomorrow. When